Hi guys, and welcome to Time Travelling Team, the weekly podcast where we review every story of Doctor Who right from the very beginning. I'm Paddy.
And I'm Trisha. In today's story, we'll be discussing the Sensorites. We'll be going through some trivia, discussing the characters, and giving our thoughts on the story as a whole. Before we get to all that though, Paddy, why don't you give us a recap of the story?
Absolutely. Episode 1, Strangers in Space. The Doctor announces that the outside view screen is filled with static, so they cannot see their new location. After a brief retrospective of their time together, the travellers head out to investigate their new surroundings. They appear to have landed in the command bridge of a spaceship, which explains the confused motion readings on the TARDIS sensors. They encounter several crew members sitting at their stations, but they appear to all be dead. Susan says that they should go back to the TARDIS as she has an uneasy feeling about the whole scenario. Before they go, the Doctor notices that the design of the watches they are wearing. They are based on kinetic energy and stop working after 24 hours of non-movement by the wearer, indicating the crew have been dead for at least a day. Susan, however, points out that the bodies are still warm, and the group decide to go back to the TARDIS. As they are about to enter, one of the bodies starts to come to and asks for something from a nearby shelf. He uses the device and regains full consciousness. He asks the group to use it on the other crew member, and she also wakes up. He introduces himself as Captain Maitland, and Carol is his co-pilot, and they were in some sort of a hypersleep. They come from Earth in the 28th century, and they say that to the travellers that they should leave. The Doctor questions them more, and they reveal that they are orbiting a planet called the Sensphere, and its inhabitants, the Sensorites, have prevented them from leaving. Every time they try to escape, the Sensorites put them back into hypersleep, but show no other malicious intent towards them. As they are talking, an unseen figure removes the lock from the TARDIS. Barbara notices a burning smell, and they discover that the TARDIS lock is gone. The Doctor and Susan say with the lock removed, they are permanently shut out of the TARDIS. Suddenly the ship begins to shake violently, and Maitland says it is the work of the Sensorites. They force him to place the ship on a collision course with the planet, but the Doctor and Ian, who are immune to their powers, manage to regain the control of the ship and avert disaster. As they are eating, the travellers and their new friends discuss the malevolent, superior nature of the Sensorites. Carl says that their third crew member, John, is the only one to have seen one in person, but Maitland refuses to elaborate further. Susan and Barbara go to retrieve water from a storage room, but unbeknownst to them, John, who appears to be in a fugue state, closes the bridge door behind him and follows them down the corridor to the storage room. The Doctor is curious as to why Maitland and Carl are being so secretive. They suddenly realise Barbara and Susan haven't come back yet, and they dash to find them. They find all the doors to the storage room have been sealed off, and apologises that there is nothing they can do to help them. Carl reveals John was her fiancé, and that the Sensorites experimented on him more than the others, and as a result, he seems to have completely lost his mind. She convinces Maitland to help save Barbara and Susan. John chases after Barbara and Susan, but breaks down in tears when he corners them and then flees. They find him in the hallway, and he seems completely helpless. They offer to help look after him. They suddenly hear the sound of Sensorite ships approaching, and he offers to protect them from what is about to happen. Maitland attempts to cut through the bridge door, but stops when he hears the Sensorite ships approaching. They see the ships approaching rapidly on the view screen, and the Doctor wonders if they are coming to enslave them or kill them. Whatever their intentions, the travellers and the crew need to be ready to defend themselves. Ian sees a whiskered, mottled-faced figure appear outside one of the viewports. The Sensorites have arrived. Episode 2, The Unwilling Warriors. The Sensorite uses his mental ability to paralyse Maitland and Carol, but the Doctor manages to arouse Maitland, and he goes back to cutting through the bridge door. The Doctor urges everyone to remain calm and clear-headed, as that is how the Sensorites gain control of their victims, through conflicting emotions of the mind. In the corridor, John is struggling to resist the instructions of the Sensorites to attack Susan and Barbara. Susan says that in order to help him, both she and Barbara should create a mental roadblock that will push the Sensorites back. They combine their thought processes to defy the will of the Sensorites, and it seems to work as the two invading creatures seem to be suddenly racked with pain. Although they are successful, Susan passes out from the strain. Susan comes to as the Doctor and Carol are discussing why the Sensorites have been attacking John so much. Ian appears and says that he might know the cause as he heard John mumble something before he fell asleep. It's possible that due to his role as the ship's mineralogist, John discovered something on the Sensphere that the Sensorites want to be kept secret. The Doctor says that it might be time to reach out to the Sensorites in an effort to discover what they want and to also recover the lock of the TARDIS. The two Sensorites from earlier seem to have recovered from their mental resistance and receive a communication from the First Elder via their telepathic relay devices. They are instructed to observe the new arrival, especially Susan and Barbara. If they encounter resistance or hostility, they are to summon aid. The travellers and the crew are investigating John's spectrograph readings to see what he could have discovered, but can't seem to find anything of importance. On closer inspection, though, the Doctor discovers the planet is rich in a valuable mineral called molybdenum. Suddenly, the Sensorites launch another mental attack, affecting Maitland and Carol, so Ian and Barbara go off in search of them. They find the two Sensorites, and Ian sends Barbara back to Maitland to find a way to seal them into their room. The Sensorites advance on Ian, but make no aggressive move towards him. Maitland cannot assist him due to still being under the control of the Sensorites, so Barbara gets John to help her lock the doors. Ian indicates that they seem to be just as scared of him as he is of them. The Sensorites communicate with Susan telepathically and use her as a go-between for the two groups. They agree to talk peacefully, and the Sensorites enter the bridge. They account for their actions, saying that they have been mistrustful of humans since they brought a disease to the planet years beforehand. They inform the travellers that they will be brought to the Sensphere, where they will live out the rest of their lives. The group refuse the terms, and the Doctor promises to cause them a great deal of trouble unless they return the TARDIS lock. The Sensorites leave to discuss what they shall do, and the Doctor tells the others that he has gleaned a vital piece of information from the meeting. The Sensorites are nearly blind in the dim lighting. Suddenly Susan answers another telepathic message. The Sensorites come to collect her, and Susan informs the group that she is to go down to the planet or the others will all be killed. Episode 3. Hidden Danger. Ian and Barbara chase after Susan, but she is reluctant to return as she thinks going with the Sensorites is for the best. Despite her protest, the Doctor orders her to come back to him, and when the Sensorites attempt to stop her, he tells Ian to turn off the lights. The Doctor's theory proves to be correct, as the Sensorites stumble about in terror in the darkness. With the Sensorites at their mercy, the Doctor and Ian demand the lock of the TARDIS back. The Sensorites say that they must discuss this with their elders and send a psychic communication to the Sensphere. While they are doing this, the Doctor and Susan argue over her taking matters into her own hands without discussion, and him still treating her like a small child. The Doctor accuses the Sensorites of causing dissent between him and his granddaughter, and upon seeing his anger, Susan agrees to follow his lead. The Sensorites inform him that they have been instructed to listen to them, and so the Doctor requests a meeting with the elders to discuss the freedom of both themselves and the crew. Carol and Maitland are trying their best to comfort John, but he doesn't seem to recognise them, and all he wants is for the voices in his head to stop. Carol despairs that she will never be able to get her fiancé back. The Sensorites say that the Doctor, Ian and Susan, Carol and John can go down to the planet, but Barbara and Maitland must remain on board with the other Sensorites. To help ease Ian's suspicions, they offer to try and help John recover. The Doctor asks them why they use their telepathic abilities in such an antagonistic way. One of them explains that 10 years before, 5 humans came exploring to the planet, and they were welcomed. They quarrelled for an unknown reason, and 2 of them departed. Their ship exploded in orbit, and it is assumed that it was caused by the remaining humans having snuck on board in an attempt to seize back control. Since then, Sensorites have been dying from a disease that they previously mentioned. It now appears that the Doctor will gain the TARDIS lock back, but in exchange for him using his knowledge to help find a cure. However, the Council of Elders appears to not be on the same page in terms of the First Elder's use of the Doctor and his friends and his admiration for them. The Second Elder and the City Administrator seem to be distrustful of humans, with the City Administrator plotting to kill them at the first sign of trouble. He orders one of his subordinates to program a disintegrator beam to target the seating area that the visitors will be stationed at. Upon arriving on the planet's surface, they discover that the Sensorites live in a caste-based society, with everyone fulfilling a role in their society. The closer they get to the council chambers, the more agitated John becomes. Susan informs Carol that this could be to their benefit, as due to the psychic assaults he's received, John is more prone to picking up the negative intentions of the Sensorites. They meet with the First Elder, and John senses no malice from him, but he can detect it from somewhere else in the building. Back in the disintegrator room, the Second Elder enters and orders the beam to be deactivated, as he is satisfied that the visitors mean no harm. The City Administrator reluctantly agrees, but voices his distrust of the travellers. Once the Second Elder is gone, he begins to recruit his subordinates to his cause. Back in the council chambers, the First Elder is recounting the story of the 5 human explorers. When the molybdenum deposits were discovered, the Sensorites telepathically picked up one of the explorers' intentions to mine the entire planet and saw the end of their way of life. Feeling that they had no other choice, the Sensorites imprisoned them through telepathic suggestion. They begin to eat, and the First Elder notices that the travellers have been given substandard food and water, and orders it for it to be replaced with a selection from the Elder's supplies. As they are dining, Ian begins to complain of a burning throat and starts to cough and choke and collapses to the floor. The First Elder informs them that Ian appears to have contracted the disease which is killing the Sensorites. Episode 4. A Race Against Death. The doctor examines Ian and asks if the disease is contagious, but the First Elder replies it is not. The doctor also confirms with him that none of the elders have been afflicted with the disease. He then realizes that the source of the disease must be in the water that Ian drank from. The doctor asks to be given access to a laboratory so he can work on finding a cure. The First Elder informs him that no patient has lived past the third day. The doctor requests permission to be given access to the TARDIS so he can use the equipment on board to save everyone on the planet. The First Elder says he will need to discuss it with the Second Elder before he can make a decision. The Second Elder advises the use of caution, as they have no way of knowing that the doctor won't bring more humans to mine the planet. He leaves the First Elder to think on what he said and encounters the city administrator trying to interfere with John's treatment. He recounts the recent events, and the city administrator leaps on his uncertainty by claiming Ian is not sick and that the cure is a ruse to destroy the Sensorites. John feels his evil intentions, but he is unable to formulate his words coherently, and the city administrator says that this is a sign of his guilt. The Second Elder says that he must warn the First Elder and leaves just as Carol enters. The administrator takes offence at her not recognising his status and badge of office. She apologises, saying that from behind, all Sensorites look similar, and she can only distinguish them by their badges of office. This seems to strike a chord with the city administrator, who leaves quickly. Meanwhile, the doctor is giving out to the First Elder over his hemming and hawing over the situation. The Second Elder arrives and converses telepathically with the First Elder, but Susan is not able to pick up any signals from them. The First Elder denies the doctor's requests and informs him that he can instead work in one of their laboratories. The doctor shouts in frustration at him, and Susan points out that they also appear to be highly sensitive to sound. The doctor tells Susan to look after Ian while he goes to work on the cure. The First Elder informs the city administrator that the doctor will be working on one of their laboratories, which further infuriates him. After he leaves, the city administrator informs his subordinates of his plans to impersonate the Second Elder by taking his sash. The doctor reviews his preliminary tests with the scientists assigned to help him, and informs them that the water contains traces of atropine poison. He asks about the case history of the virus and is told that 3 in every 10 Sensorites have died from it, despite the fact that every district in the city gets the water from the same source. He says that they need to test every district's water stocks. Districts 1 through 7 show negative results for the poison, but they discover atropine in the next test, so the doctor starts to work on a cure. Once it is ready, he sends a sample to be given to Ian. The doctor goes to speak with Carol, who is attending to John. He says that he finds it unusual that according to the case reports that the poison seems to be moving between the districts. John once again tries to warn them of the plot against them, but he is still not coherent enough. The doctor asks Carol to take note of what John says going forward, as he is going on an expedition to discover the cause of the poisoning of the water. The Second Elder attends a meeting organised by the city administrator and is captured by his subordinates. The city administrator again says that Ian is not sick, and the cure is a means to exterminate the Sensorites. He takes the Second Elder's badge of office and says that he will sabotage the cure. He tests out his new disguise. It works better than he had hoped, as the person he tests it on is the scientist carrying the cure for Ian. He says that he will take it instead, and once the scientist is gone, he smashes it to the ground. He tells his subordinate that if he is right, then Ian will be fine, and if he is wrong, then Ian will die and know that the doctor was telling the truth. The doctor arrives at the entrance of the reservoir with one of his assistants, who tells him that he is afraid to enter the cave due to the constantly malfunctioning lights and the beasts that dwell within the reservoir caves. The doctor sends him back, suspicious that the potential source of the poison is defended by the 2 greatest fears of the Sensorites. Susan is worrying about what happened to the cure that was sent for Ian, and so the First Elder sends her to the laboratory. She manages to find another vial of the cure and administers it to Ian. The First Elder wonders why the Second Elder never arrived with the cure, as he was previously told, but he is distracted from these thoughts when the scientist returns to inform him of the doctor entering the reservoir. Ian and Susan state that they will go after them, despite warnings from the First Elder that all previous expeditions have met with disaster. He sends a mental message to the Second Elder, saying that they have misjudged the intentions of the travellers. The city administrator forces him to reveal what is being said, as he has taken his family hostage. The city administrator is happy to hear this, as he is sure that the doctor will meet his doom in the caves. Meanwhile, at the caves, the doctor has discovered the source of the poison. Deadly nightshade has been growing in the caves near the waterways. However, his feelings of vindication are cut short when he hears a monstrous howl approaching him. Episode 5. Kidnap. Ian and Susan discover the unconscious form of the doctor after hearing him call out. His clothes are torn to pieces, as if he had been shredded by the claws of some huge beast. He eventually comes to and is incredulous when Susan tells him that the first vial of the cure never made it to Ian and that she had to go to the lab herself. The doctor says that they are beset by enemies on all sides and they must find the Sensorite that is working against them. As they leave, a Sensorite observes them from the shadows. Back in the city, Carl laments the fact that the Sensorites are unable to enter the caves to aid the travellers. The First Elder instead tries to ease her misery by saying John is nearing full recovery. John is becoming more and more coherent, but the chief scientist says that there is no plot and that his statements are merely the remaining effects of the psychological trauma he has undergone. The Sensorite from the cave returns to inform the city administrator about what he saw. The city administrator forces the Second Elder to summon the chief warrior to deliver the key for the disintegrator so that he can use it against the travellers. The travellers return just in time to see the city administrator retrieve the key from the chief warrior. The doctor attempts to speak with him, but he flees, concerned that the doctor could potentially see through his disguise. They instead decide to go petition the First Elder to allow Barbara to come down to the planet. The city administrator returns to put the key into the disintegrator, but the Second Elder manages to break free of his guard and sabotage the key before he is beaten to the ground. The guard realizes that he has killed him and says that they should flee, but the city administrator says that it could still work to their advantage. In the council chambers, the travellers are discussing the recent odd behaviour of the Second Elder. Suddenly, the city administrator, wearing his normal badge of office, enters with his subordinate and the chief warrior. The subordinate accuses the doctor of having killed the Second Elder for control of the key, using the chief warrior as a witness as he had seen the doctor call after the Second Elder upon his return to the city. However, Ian manages to catch out the subordinate in a lie. He said that the doctor had pulled a weapon from his coat, but the torn coat had been left back at the cave. The city administrator changes his strategy and states that the Second Elder had a vendetta against the travellers, citing his initial hostility and his odd behaviour when being impersonated. The First Elder is swayed by this, and along with the misguided backing of the doctor and his companions, offers the city administrator the role of Second Elder. John has fully recovered and reunites with his delighted Carol. He says that he can't seem to fully remember any of his previous experiences. The travellers enter and Susan asks him about his earlier comments about betrayal, but he says he can't really remember. All he knows for certain is that he sensed a Sensorite plotting against them, and all that he can remember was that he wore a distinct badge of office. The new Second Elder enters and becomes convinced that he is safe. He demands that Susan send the doctor to the First Elder and abruptly leaves. His odd behaviour triggers a thought in Susan, and she asks John to describe the badge of office that he saw. The group realize that the city administrator was the enemy all along, and that they have now helped put him into a new position of power. The doctor and Ian discuss their recent discovery and decide that they need to gather proof to show what the city administrator has been up to. They decide to go to the reservoir again to investigate the poisoning, and they inform the First Elder of this, who sends a telepathic communication for weapons and supplies to be brought for them. They also request that Barbara come down to keep Susan company, which the First Elder grants. The doctor explains that Susan will only want to come with them, and so requests that their leaving be kept secret. Their weapons, supplies, and a map of the reservoir arrive, but unbeknownst to them, have all been sabotaged by the city administrator and his accomplice, who he freed from jail. Ian and the doctor depart, not knowing the danger that they are walking into, and the First Elder thinks about all that has occurred and comes to the conclusion that a Sensorite is behind everything, but he cannot fathom for what. Meanwhile, Susan, John and Carol are discussing the couple's plans for the future and wondering where the doctor and Ian have gone. Carol offers to go look for them, but once she's out of the room, an unseen figure ambushes her. Episode 6. A Desperate Venture. Carol's assailants are revealed to be the city administrator and his subordinate. They force her to write a letter to John, saying that she has gone back to the ship. The letter is sent to John and Susan, who show it to the recently arrived Barbara. They agree that the city administrator is most likely behind it and the disappearance of the doctor and Ian. The First Elder joins them and they tell him their suspicions, but do not implicate the city administrator. He is initially doubtful of their belief that Carol has been taken hostage, but agrees to let them search the building for her. He also tells them where the doctor and Ian have gone, which causes Susan to worry. At the suggestion of the First Elder, they go to search the disintegrator room first. Inside the room, the subordinate is taunting Carol when John arrives. John uses the Sensorite's weakness to sound against him by shouting at him. The chief warrior enters and takes the subordinates back into custody. The First Elder is alarmed by the plot that has been occurring and confides in the city administrator that he will put a stop to it. Susan and Barbara enter and inform him of the sabotage supplies given to the doctor and Ian. He laments their potential passing, but Barbara says that if they get the proper map to the reservoir, then they will attempt to rescue. Despite the administrator's plea, the First Elder promises to help them however he can, as thanks for all that they have done for the Sensorites. Meanwhile, in the caves, the Doctor and Ian have discovered the sabotage but decide to press on with their investigation. As they go further into the caves, they hear movement up ahead, and Ian ambushes the figure, but it manages to get away. Ian reveals that it was a man and shows the Doctor a shoulder patch that he managed to rip away from the figure. It has the letters INEER on it, and the Doctor says it is most likely a survivor from the previous human ship. They go after the figure to find out more, but they find out that he's not alone, and they are the ones that end up being ambushed. The strangers ask if the Sensorites are still alive, and if they have a ship. They refuse to go outside for fear of being spied on by the Sensorites, and instead bring the prisoners to speak with their commander. Back in the city, Barbara requests the use of a telepathic transmitter so that she can stay in contact with Susan while she goes with John and a few Sensorite warriors to search the reservoir. They arrive and follow Susan's instructions and also relay anything that they encounter. They come across the abandoned fake maps and several directional markings left by the Doctor. The Doctor and Ian are introduced to the commander, who is acting like that they are in a war. It appears that they have loaded the poison nightshade into the various waterways in an effort to eradicate the Sensorites. He also reveals he sabotaged the original spaceship when two of his crew defected and attempted to return home. The Doctor and Ian play along with his delusion and inform him that he has won the conflict. He immediately becomes suspicious of his prisoners, as he thinks that they are also after the planet's supply of molybdenum, which he says belongs to him and his crew. One of the crew members interrupts him and announces the presence of the intruders in the caves. John and Barbara are brought in, and the Doctor immediately gets them to play along in his deception. Together they convince the commander that a victory celebration will be held in his honour once he leaves the cave with them. He agrees and orders his men to escort the prisoners out. However, they are taken into custody by the Sensorite warriors, who stun the commander when he attempts to attack them. Back in the city, Ian and Barbara informs the First Elder that Maitland has agreed to take the others back to Earth, and he in turn informs them that the city administrator has been banished for his treachery. They bid each other a happy farewell. Inside the TARDIS, the Doctor comforts Susan, who says that her telepathy will recede once they leave the Sense Sphere. The Doctor promises to help hone her abilities once they go back home. This seems to cheer Susan up, who appears to be having a bout of homesickness since an earlier discussion she had with the First Elder about their respective worlds. Together they all watch the spaceship as it makes its way back to Earth, with Ian jokingly passing a comment about how they at least know where their next destination is. However, it seems the Doctor does not take kindly to this comment on his abilities as a pilot, and says to Ian that once they land at their next destination, he will personally escort them off the TARDIS. End of the story. So that's it for the story recap. We're now going to go over to Trisha for some trivia notes. Over to you, Trish.
Great. So, The Sensorites was written by Peter R. Newman. Now, of all the writers we've spoken about so far, there is the least amount of information available about Peter online. In fact, most of the information available is taken from the Looking for Peter documentary included on the DVD release of The Sensorites, which was created because there was so little known about Peter. Some things we do know from that documentary is Peter served in World War II, but his start as a soldier was not quite straightforward. Originally, he left school and swapped clothes with a soldier he met, hoping to take his place. What he didn't know was that soldier was actually a deserter from the army. This resulted in him having troubles with the police, who thought that he was the deserter, and there was a whole thing with that. He then got expelled from school because he had run away. He did later join the army legally, and he served in Burma, during which time he befriended a Japanese soldier. He wrote the television play Yesterday's Enemy, which he later rewrote as a screenplay for the Hammer Films company of the same name. So the film Yesterday's Enemy by Hammer Films was one of his. He was commissioned for more scripts for Hammer, but his requests for more money kind of soured their relationship and they didn't produce any more of his work. His screenplay, The Santiago Killings, if I've pronounced that correctly, became the basis of one of the first spaghetti westerns, Savage Guns. He absolutely loved the fact that he got to write for Doctor Who, though he did think that the Sensorites' costumes were a bit silly, which I would agree with, and I'm sure we'll discuss more in a minute. The Sensorites is his only Doctor Who writing credit and is in fact his final writing credit. Not having anything else produced after and suffering from severe writer's block, he got a job at the Tate Gallery as a porter. There was a lot of public confusion around when Peter actually died. Some sources saying that he died in 1969, other sources saying he died in 1975, and there were talks that he may have actually committed suicide. Peter actually died in 1975 of a cerebral hemorrhage after falling down a flight of stairs at work.
That guy has had a very interesting life. Because I haven't seen that documentary, I'd love to watch it myself.
Yeah, I'll give you a loan the DVD. It's a documentary where people discover all of this extra information, which clearly they've researched in advance, kind of like those who do you think you are type things. But you just sort of feel bad for the guy. He didn't have the best life, but his family clearly cared for him a great deal. His sister and his niece are interviewed in that documentary. Again, for this story, we have two directors. We have Mervyn Pinfield directing episodes 1 through 4, and Frank Cox directing episodes 5 and 6. Mervyn Pinfield was actually the associate producer of Doctor Who, from the first story An Unearthly Child up to the Romans. His directing credits for Who include this story, as well as 2 episodes of Planet of the Giants and all of the Space Museum. Pinfield was also known as the inventor of an early type of teleprompter, or autocue, which he called the penny prompter. He passed away in 1966, just 3 years after Doctor Who started. The second director is Frank Cox. We've discussed Frank before, as he directed the second episode of the story The Edge of Destruction. This is his last Doctor Who directorial credit, and I do think it's sad that we don't get the opportunity to see more of his work, and he didn't have an opportunity to direct an entire story by himself, always having to share with someone else.
Yeah, that's kind of sad.
This episode aired from the 20th of June to the 1st of August 1964. Now, our guest cast. We have quite a broad cast today, so let's get into it. First, as John, we have Stephen Dartnell. I would say you may recognise Stephen, but his previous role in Doctor Who, you couldn't see his face. So, Stephen also played Vartek, the leader of the Vord in the Keys of Marnus. This time we do actually get to see his face, which is great. This is his final Doctor Who appearance, and he passed away in 1994. Carol was played by Ilona Rogers. She did a lot of work in the UK, Australia and New Zealand. This is her only Doctor Who acting credit though. She continued to be very active in film and television after Who, with her most recent acting credit being in 2018. Maitland is played by Lorne Cosette? I'm gonna go with Cosette. Again, only Doctor Who acting credit for Lorne, and he passed away in 2001. The First Elder is played by Eric Francis. Again, only Doctor Who credit to his name. I would say you may recognise him, but again, we don't get to see his face, so maybe not. But you may recognise his voice. He was in loads of TV shows and movies over the years, including Monty Python's The Meaning of Life, in the segment The Crimson Permanent Assurance. Eric passed away in 1991. The Second Elder, I'll say the actual Second Elder, was played by Bartlett Mullins. He passed away in 1992, and again, this is his only Doctor Who acting credit. However, he did appear on screen with another Doctor, as he was in Wurzel Gummidge.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Let's go back and watch that again.
The City Administrator is played by Peter Glaze. Another one with only one Doctor Who acting credit to his name. I'm kind of repeating myself. Peter was the host of Crackerjack, which is a live broadcast children's TV program with sketches and games and stuff, and he presented that in the 1960s and 1970s. He actually did a sketch as a man we will later come to know in Doctor Who, the Brigadier. Peter sadly died in 1983. Lastly, we have the commander of the humans that were on the Sense Sphere. This was played by John Bailey. Now, John appeared in 2 more Doctor Who stories after this one. He played Edward Waterfield in The Evil of the Daleks, and Sesam in The Horns of Niman. John passed away in 1989. And I'm going to say one thing right now, going through all this trivia, is one of the things about the older episodes, I do find myself more often than I would like making note of such and such passed away in this year, and this story in particular, it was actually quite distressing having to write that down so many times.
It kind of, it is a shame because like when you get, if it's a particular story that you like, having so many of those actors that you want to see their filmography or what they've done up until now, and you see them dying like 20, 30 odd years ago, it is kind of sad to see.
Yeah. A few more things about the Sensorites. The working title for the story was Mind Control, which I think is a little bit on the nose.
Just a tad.
Russell T Davies, who many will know as the man who brought Doctor Who back in the 2000s, has acknowledged the Sensorites were an influence on the basic concept of the Ood. And computer readouts revealed that the Ood sphere and the Sense sphere are in the same star system.
Oh.
So those guys are neighbours.
That's kind of cool.
We have mentioned in the last few stories that the main cast were taking holidays, and this story it is the turn of Jacqueline Hill, who was on holiday during the recording of the 4th and 5th episodes. Hence why Barbara remained on the ship while everyone else went down to the Sense sphere.
Barbara doing her best to enact the role of Thunderbird 5, the poor fecker that gets stuck in the space station.
Yeah, I didn't think about it that way, but yeah. So we've gone through the episode recap, we've discussed some trivia about the Sensorites, now it's time to discuss the characters themselves. So, Paddy, what do you think of the Doctor in the Sensorites?
Again, another really strong showing from Hartnell in this one, because this is a very Doctor-centric story, I find. We get to see like more of his scientific acumen this time around. Like between like working in the laboratory, going and investigating the cave system. I think we've now seen like a fully rounded version of the Doctor, because like we've seen him as a historical expert in with his time traveling. We've seen him as kind of the engineer. We've seen him as a detective, but now we get to see him as the scientist. I thought that was kind of really cool. Also, again, William Hartnell, his just righteous indignation at things is amazing. And the best thing as well is like it's not that sort of like, you know, how dare you, like, you know, like you know, it's like for he's just giving out for the sake of giving out. A lot of it's justified and it's for the right reasons. So it's kind of funny to see him when he's blustering for the wrong reasons, but it's really cool to see him bluster for the right reasons. So I really enjoyed the Doctor in this story.
Yeah, I think his blustering in this, like I said, most of the time it's justified, or at least understandable, you know, if not 100% justified. The thing that I found kind of humorous, though, was how it has been explained to him time and again, and Susan explains to him every time, don't yell at them, it really hurts them, stop it. And he just can't prevent himself from doing it, and he's just like, oh, fine, whatever. And again, it's that bluster and that kind of like self-importance that is really part of his character. I do think it's great that we get to see his scientific knowledge in his treatment of Ian. It really kind of reminded me of going back to an unearthly child when he leaves the TARDIS and he's taking his samples and stuff like that. That's really what he does. You know, he explores different planets and takes measurements and scientific notes about them. We do also get to see his technical ability as well, and his knowledge of spacecraft. You know, he very quickly jumps in to help control the ship, Maitland and Carol's ship, when it's going to crash into the Sense sphere, and you know, very quickly comes up with, okay, we're going to come at it from this trajectory, and then we're going to hit the thrusters, and we're going to veer off course. That I thought was really, really good, because you kind of get the sense that maybe he can't fly the TARDIS very well.
Yeah, because like you'd be there going, right, okay, he essentially hot wires the spaceship to regain control of it, and it kind of makes you wonder what else has he hot wired in his past.
Yeah. Yeah. He is very protective of Susan in this story, and this is probably the one where we see the most of his nature with her.
Mm.
He does come off as a bit overbearing in the way a parental figure or granddad would. And because we kind of associate a bit more with Susan, so he comes across as a bit harsh and controlling, but he does it because he loves her and he wants what's best for her. You know, she may have thought it was a good idea for me to go into the sense sphere alone, but he's like, no, in what realm was that a good idea?
And it's also the thing of where, like, Susan is, as opposed to being like kind of questioning her decisions, she's dead certain that this is what's best for the group. And I think maybe it's that little spark of independence that maybe frightens him a small bit.
Yeah, I do like his line that, like, it's one of the sort of duties of old age is to gather knowledge and wisdom to share with younger people. And I kind of had to laugh and in my head add the line, when they want it. This is the first inclination we get as well that the Doctor is not a fan of weapons.
Yeah.
His reaction to the bug zapper type looking things. You know, we get the sense that he really doesn't like weapons, which is something that, you know, will continue on throughout the series. But at this point in time, he recognizes that they do occasionally have a use. He just would rather not have to use them.
And just to explain to people, the bug zapper things, so the Sensorite weapons are essentially like those electrified tennis rackets you use to swat flies.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, like, one thing that we get to see in the story as well is the Doctor's fashion sense, as he very dashingly shows off his new cape.
My next line was, I love his cape. And I love how he loves his cape as well.
Yeah.
Which is great. We kind of get that sense of the sort of playful nature he has with clothes.
Yeah, because, like, if you think about it, like, he's an alien that's, like, had all of time and space to kind of go through. And he lands, like, we first encounter him in 1963 in London. And, like, Susan's, you know, very kind of in her hip and trendy clothing. Whereas he's dressed like he's in the Edwardian times. And it's like, okay, not quite the style of the day, but I think it's stylish on me.
Yeah, and he never changes his clothes.
Nope.
This is his first clothing change that we've seen.
Yeah.
The thing as well is this is a great story for the Doctor. We get to see lots of sides of him. But we are reminded that there are certain parts of his character that we maybe don't like, which is he is still a mistrusting old man. That is still there. And we can see that in his response to Ian at the end of the episode. Now, I haven't watched next week's episode, so I don't know if this is kind of meant as a joke, but he is someone who, when his ego gets bruised...
Yeah, so just to give you the heads up, no, the first episode of next week's story, it's a promise. It's not a joking threat. It's a promise.
Yeah. So that part of him is still there, which I don't mind, because it makes him a complete person.
Yeah, and, like, I see. The thing is, like, the first 16 stories of Doctor Who are what I would consider to be, like, just one of the best arcs of science fiction storytelling that I've seen in a very long time across different shows. And I think, without trying to give too much away, the Doctor cares for Ian and Barbara more than he would initially let on. So I think whenever the concept of home does come up, it annoys him because he's having fun.
Yeah, I think he also, you know, he doesn't like them making fun of him.
Well, yeah, no, that too as well.
Nobody
like,
would.
Yeah. And, like, yeah, like, I suppose, like, to be fair, like, it's the kind of anything, like, you know, it's like, you know, your driving's terrible. Well, like, who's the one that owns the car?
I'll pull this car over and I'll make you get out.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, a great story for the Doctor, I think. I think we can both agree on that.
Yes.
Next up, we have someone who hasn't really had a lot of time in the limelight in recent stories, but really got to show it here. What do you think of Susan?
I love Susan in the story. And this is the character that we got to see the potential of, that had been slowly building, and I think it might have been too slow of a build. Like the payoff is great, but I think, like, I would have liked to have seen her be this, like, assertive in an earlier story.
Yeah, we've kind of discussed a lot that she didn't really do much in some of the other stories.
Yeah. Like, the fact, as I said, that she assesses the situation and just maybe it's like with the belief that her psychic abilities are more than her grandfather's, which I think is another point that freaks him out. She's like, well, I can communicate with these people perfectly on their own medium. I think for the betterment of everyone, maybe I should go. So it's her taking command. I think that's a really interesting thing to see. She's very involved in every aspect of the story. Like, where's the cure for Ian? We need to go find grandfather. I'll call out commands to you as you go to rescue them. That sort of stuff. It's great. And it's the Susan that I would have loved to have seen a small bit earlier. And there's one thing I want to call out is in the sequence where Susan and the First Elder are talking about their respective homes, and she gives this lovely monologue about unnamed planet soon to be called Gallifrey. It's just really beautiful, and well done to Caroline Ford for getting across that. Like, it actually did seem like she was legitimately talking about somewhere that she came from and missed terribly.
Yeah, that was a great piece of acting from Caroline in that moment, and I love the bit of description that we get of their home planet.
Yeah.
I love that it's a description that they do keep, spoilers, throughout the show. And that, you know, up until this point, Susan has mentioned home way more than the Doctor has.
Yeah.
And you get the sense that she does really miss it, but she likes adventure. But, you know, she gets homesick, which is understandable. And we still don't know why they left in the first place. So,
yeah.
Did they leave to have adventure, or did they leave for another reason? Did they have to? We don't know. The thing I find about Susan in this story is I completely 100% agree with you. This is her strongest outing to date.
Yeah.
And what I find super interesting about it is it's a bit of a juxtaposition, because if you look at her in the episode, she looks like a primary school child.
Yeah.
She's wearing a pinafore and high stockings, and she looks like she's a school child. But this is her most mature that we've seen her.
Yeah.
While, yeah, the others take care of her in the same way that they always do, because that's their natural inclination anyway. She shows great maturity. She figured out how to interrupt the Sensorites' effect on John. She has great insight. We get to see great insight into her telepathic abilities and the connections it gives her to the Sensorites. And like you said, she takes control. You know, she doesn't wait around for people to tell her what to do anymore. And I think knowing that she had this telepathic ability and knowing how strong it was, and maybe how it made her unique, you know, it was something that she could, you know, usually she's the kid and everyone has to take care of her. And this gave her an opportunity to take care of others. I think it really gave her the confidence she needed to grow into a full member of the team and not just the kid everyone has to take care of.
Yeah.
What I do love as well is I've mentioned previously, I think it was in the Daleks discussion, how Susan is very trusting and literally trusts anyone who comes her way. It's good to see that we get a little bit of growth in that here.
Yeah.
Where she tries to educate the first leader on how trust has to be earned. And I don't know if that's them trying to make her learn from previous mistakes or whatever the case may be, but it's nice that she's the one trying to help others learn and grow. And we've kind of seen bits of that in the past with the way she was with her friend in Marco Polo, the way she stood up for herself in the Aztecs, but I think it really sort of came to the fore here. She's not a little girl. She's a young woman who's coming into her own.
Yeah. And just here to talk, point about the pinafore and the high socks. It's like, this is like the Matilda story we never got to see.
Yeah, actually. So
cool.
Moving down. Go on. Sorry.
No, I was actually going to say the same thing. Moving on along the line.
Yeah. What do we think about Ian?
So Ian and Barbara are kind of lumped into the same category for me, in the sense of this is very much a Doctor and Susan story, and Ian and Barbara are backup, I think.
Yeah.
And Ian, what I loved about Ian in this story was that for once we get to see him put into the vulnerable position of being the one on death's door with after being affected by the tainted water supply. And I thought that was really cool. Like, it was great to see Ian not do that much. because it gave the other guys a chance to kind of grow, and as well, like when you have a character that has been so strong for so long, like, it could become potentially a bit stagnant.
Yeah.
And I would say that maybe like when they were writing this, they realized that, and they kind of decided to push Barbara and Ian on the back burner a small bit in terms of the hero moments, because the last couple of stories have been great for Barbara and Ian as well.
Yeah, I think, in most of our discussions, whenever we get to Ian, like, I've been calling him Action Man, and like every story has been, oh, Ian's been Action Man. This is actually the one story when I was watching it where his Action Man behavior is not needed for this story.
Yeah.
That part of him isn't providing any value, and in fact it could have gotten them in a lot of trouble, because the way he was reacting to the Sensorites, he was reacting in a very aggressive fashion. He was told, don't engage with them, don't fight them, don't attack them, and yet when they're walking towards him and Barbara, his instinct was to grab a pipe and repeatedly threaten them with it.
Kind of speaking to your point about your headcanon from last week about Ian Chesterton being the descendant of Sir Lancelot, it kind of does remind me of a different Sir Lancelot, Lancelot from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, that just continually just dives into danger where there is no danger needed. And it's just like, you're like, I'm sorry, I just can't help it when I see people like, with weapons, I can't help but fight. Just kind of that type of thing.
Yeah, and I think, the fact that Ian was the character in the story who came down with the illness and who, as you said, was on death's door, he was pretty much powerless for a large portion of this story. He did a little bit in the first episode where him and Barbara went to hunt down the Sensorites, and he did a little bit in the last episode. But he's basically powerless for so much of it. He can't help Barbara and Susan because he can't cut through the door. Now, why he didn't take over cutting through the door while the others went back to deal with the actual flight of the ship, I don't quite know. But he can't get to them, and he gets so frustrated because that's what he does. That's who he is, and he can't do it.
But as well, because he became down to sickness, yes, shout out to the band Disturbed for down to sickness. Because he did get the tainted water supply, we now got treated to like a rarity in Doctor Who, which is a montage of like the Doctor in the laboratory with the different test tubes and all the different equipment. And my personal favourite, the list of District 1, no. There's like a handwritten list. All the scientific equipment, and in order to eliminate possibilities, you need to use a pen and paper.
But hey, it works.
It did.
So you said that like Ian didn't really get a whole lot to do in this story. He was kind of taking a backseat development-wise, which is good because we got to see more development in Susan and the Doctor. And the other person was Barbara. What were your thoughts on Barbara?
So I suppose more so than Ian, she is also in the backseat of this one, because she was on holidays, as you said, so she's up on the space station for about half the story. But what I did like about the times that she was here is that there's no deviation from her character. Like, she's her usual pragmatic, no nonsense self, leading by example, kind, considerate, and caring. That type, like when we kind of had we discussed the points ages ago about in an Earthly Child, about she went from being terrified to immediately compassionate for Za, that she didn't want him to die of his wounds.
Yeah.
Whereas here it's like they're being stalked by a clearly deranged person in John, and then when he has his emotional breakdown, her first initial kind of thoughts are to, is he okay? So it's nice to see that thread has run through the entirety of the story, and even when she's not a focal point, Barbara's still a really strong character.
Yeah, I think actually the first leader, or first elder rather, actually put it really well when he said that she's gentle yet with strong determination and courage. That is Barbara in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And that is who she was in this story. Mama Barbara really comes out in her treatment of Susan. She's very protective of Susan, but not in a restrictive way, the same way the Doctor is. She became immediately so protective of John, and, didn't have any concern for her own welfare when she realised that he was hurting.
Yeah.
As well, we get to see her intelligence, because when she comes to the sense sphere, after being separated from the rest of them for, 2 days or something?
Yeah.
she immediately reads the situation and immediately knows what the hell is. Like, they explain to her what's happening, and she's like, "Okay, this is what the situation is." And we've seen that with her before. She's very good at piecing all these things together. So yeah, I think the First Elder just summed her up in a nutshell with that quote.
You're kind of making her sound like Winston Wolfe from Pulp Fiction, like the fixer just appears, give me the gist. Okay, here's what we're doing.
Yeah, kind of.
Which I know what to see. Damn it.
So for our story-based companions, we have the crew of the ship, and then we have the first and second Elder. So what did you think of the crew of the ship?
So the crew of the ship, again, I suppose, because of the flow of the story, the nature of the story, they're a bit underdeveloped for me. They're not really that engaging. Like Maitland doesn't really make a huge impact. Carol, the thing with Carol and John is that John has gone through like a really traumatic event, and his transformation is, I think it's just a small bit too perfect. I would have preferred to have seen him be healed earlier and then have to deal with like residual PTSD as it went on, and that would have developed Carol a small bit more as opposed to just sitting by his bedside until like the second to last episode.
Yeah.
And I think they missed a trick there, but again, like because it's such a Doctor and Susan centric story, they maybe didn't have the time to put in that development. But I would have liked to have seen something like that, because Stephen Dartnell did a really good job at getting John, because initially you think he's like malicious or evil, but he's not. He's just a broken man, and it's good acting on his part to you are kind of engaged in his recovery. But I think I would like to have seen him deal with the PTSD side of things a bit more.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you about Carol and Maitland, that particularly Maitland, I almost wouldn't even give him the title of like episode based or show based companion, except that he's part of the crew. He doesn't really contribute all that much. Carol, I think, contributes a little bit more, and it's good to see her sort of on the planet in those last 2 episodes, building up a good friendship with the others. Do you know?
Yeah.
That's really good to see. John, while I agree with you on I would have liked to have seen him deal more with the PTSD when he was in his complete frame of mind.
Yeah.
And maybe I'd like to have him comment on, they locked him in part of the ship by himself.
Yeah.
There has to have been a reason for that beyond he didn't really remember them that well.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I would have liked them to refer back to that, but fair dues to the actor, because his performance was amazing. Particularly if you compare it to his performance in The Keys of Marinus, where we didn't really have a whole lot to say about him. Whereas here, he's so powerful. Like the bit where like he's breaking down and he just wants them out of his mind. It's so good. I think that while he didn't get as much development as I would have liked, what they did give him, I really, really enjoyed. Not enjoyed. Enjoyed's the wrong word. I didn't enjoy his pain, but it was good.
Yeah, it was a good performance. I think just like I would have preferred to have seen that PTSD handling, so that he could have built upon it. Yeah. One just small note on the ship's crew that I only just 2 small notes. One is that it's not all the time in Doctor Who, be what we've seen now or what we're going to see in the future, that the story-based companions get a happy ending. And this is a case where they do. John and Carol are reunited. They're going to have their wedding. They're going to go back to Earth.
I feel bad for poor Maitland.
Well, he's got his ship.
Yeah, but he has to deal with the two of them on the way back.
Yeah, it's like I hope he's got earplugs. But like, so it's nice to see like that everyone in the group gets a happy ending.
Yeah.
The other thing though is that the sequence where they're trying to cut through the door with the world's tiniest arc cutter. It's like if the guy in Shawshank had used a teaspoon to try and get out. I know he used a small rock hammer, but my God, like...
Yeah.
Or sorry, not even a teaspoon, a plastic spork. That's what the equivalent was.
Yeah, that wasn't great. I'll be honest.
Our friend's life depends on you. How far did you get? A centimeter. God damn it, man, hurry.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
you mentioned that like the crew of the ship have their happy ending. Not everyone got a happy ending though.
No, they didn't.
The first and second elder, the second elder in particular, doesn't get a happy ending. What did you think about the elders?
So we'll discuss the second elder first because we've, as you mentioned there, about the non-happy ending.
Yeah.
I think he's a very interesting character, frankly, in the sense of like you think that he's an antagonist, but he's not. Based on his role, he's a sounding board for the first elder. So when he kind of tells him to, I'm not sure if that's a good idea. It's not as in like his own personal prejudices. It's his job as a good public servant to make sure that his superior has all the information he needs to hand.
I agree with you on that one.
And then, like, even though like he's been told that his family has been placed in captivity, or like we're not even told other than like I'll kill your family. He doesn't know if it's a bluff. He doesn't know whatever it is. He still does what he can to help these complete strangers. Like he puts his own life at risk, and unfortunately he pays the ultimate price to do the right thing. So I did quite enjoy the second elder.
Yeah, I think he's a very good counterbalance to the first elder, who's quite trusting. And so, to your point, I think he fits his role quite well. He's like, okay, well, if you're being very trusting, I'm going to have to question that trust because that's my job.
Yeah.
And he does that very, very well. The fact that he breaks so easily whenever his family gets mentioned, I wouldn't see that as a bad thing either. Do you know? Because it shows that he is a caring, compassionate individual. So if you weren't sure up until that point if his discussions with the first elder were based on, personal prejudice against humans, or if they were based on being a sounding board, I think the way he reacts to knowledge that his family is in danger it shows you what a caring person he is.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I felt really bad for the poor second elder.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the first elder, who, like I said, is quite trusting. But I think he's a good leader. He doesn't trust blindly. He hears them out, listens to reason,
who he reminds
listens to
me of?
logic.
Sorry, do you know who he reminds me of?
Who?
Kicking Bird from Dances with Wolves.
That is a really good comparison.
Yeah, like in the sense of, like, he can't sense any out and out evil from the new arrivals, but he's still wary of them, and he would like to kind of get to trust them. And like he sits down, he has the meal, he accepts the doctor's help, albeit under certain conditions, but like he agrees to get them weapons. He agrees to offer, because he knows that the doctor just wants to help him.
Yeah.
And again, like listening to the sage advice of his counsel, like he goes in accordance with, right, they think this is the best course of action, so I'm going to follow their advice.
Yeah, and I don't think he how do I put it? I don't think he's easily swayed by his counsel. I think he gives it the respect that it deserves.
Yeah.
One of the things that is true about him, though, is he is a little bit naive and blinded by his belief that the society they have is a perfect one, and that his people cannot and would not lie. And as a leader, I think that is is the chink in his armor as a leader, that he believes that so wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Like it is like there are points where I kind of did want to kind of just shake him by the screen, just going, get real. Shake him by that like sash of his, just get real. But overall I did enjoy him. I did enjoy the character, and as I said, he came across very Danceable Wolvesy. Yeah,
but that naivety, I think, is why the second elder is who he is. Yeah. And together, they make really good leaders. They counterbalance each other quite well.
Yeah.
Then we have the not second elder.
Yeah.
The city administrator, the first of our villains.
You're not really painting a good picture of city administrators here, but I'll tell you that much.
He is one distrustful bastard.
Oh, as I put down bloody civil servants up to no good as usual. It's like the thing is, his mistrust and his like just aggression towards them, it just seems very out of the blue. Like, if it had said, they've had to put in the line of like, oh, he lost his family due to the sickness, which he could then blame on the humans bringing it. Fair enough, but there's no reference to that. He just seems to be an out and out xenophobe.
I think to him, he has a reason to be distrustful. Humans came to the planet, tried to exploit them for the ore in their planet.
Yeah.
Then they left, their ship blew up, and now their people are dying. I think that is a genuine concern that he has. But in sort of typical villainish fashion, he takes that one thing, ascribes all humans are evil to it, and refuses to change his mind.
Yeah. And again, like, even when it's like with the thought of, like, even when he's presented with the evidence that they're trying to help us, it's like, nah, but there must be, like, he reminds me of like certain people I know. It's look, here's evidence that this person is good. I still don't trust them.
Yeah, and like how far he goes with it as well. I mean, the first elder told us like, oh, but no one here lies and people are happy in their position. Clearly that's not true. The city administrator lies a lot. He clearly isn't happy just being the city administrator. He wants to be leader. The minute he catches on to the idea of, well, I could kill him and take his stash and that would make me second elder, he doesn't hesitate. And also, he was threatening the second elder's family repeatedly. This guy isn't a nice guy. However way he might explain away his behaviour because his people are dying and he is the city administrator, that's just an excuse.
I did kind of get a bit of a chuckle though out of the when Carol says, "Oh, sorry, like without your badges of office, I can't really tell the difference." And it's like reminds me of like that Simpsons meme of like, oh my god, why didn't I think of that? Why didn't I think to like just wear the guy's sash?
Yeah, it is a little bit racist of Carol as well, though.
Yeah, it is. It's incredibly racist.
Like Carol, they all sound different.
Yeah, like if it was possible to have like a villainous overtype in Sensorite society, like the city administrator, he's got it in spades.
Yeah, and like the thing that he uses the caste system in their society to his benefit. Yeah. When we've been led to believe that that's counter to their societal norms. Yeah, I think he's a distrustful bastard and a bit of a sneaky fucker.
Oh yeah, big time.
The other villain, and I know that there's the two other people with him, but really they don't do much, is the commander of the original Earth ship. What did you think of him?
So, the reveal of, like, as I refer to them, the fifth column.
Which I didn't know what you meant in your notes, by the way.
Right. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Like for anyone like that's kind of fifth column is essentially just like a saboteur group that managed to infiltrate a city and work on the inside to bring it down. Okay,
that makes sense. I was watching this entire episode going, where did he get that from?
The very kind of like Trojan horsey type thing. But I think they're just like very underwhelming. If there had been more references, like there's like one thing that kind of confused me in that, are there actual monsters in the reservoir caves, or is that the trio pretending to be monsters to frighten the Sensorites away?
It's the trio pretending to be monsters.
All right, yeah, because I don't think that was that actually really established?
Well, it's because it's all inferred, right? So, or implied rather. So, the Sensorites don't like the dark. Yeah. So they were sabotaging the lights. Yeah. And we see that when Susan sees a light that, and they don't investigate it further. So they were sabotaging the lights. And they're sensitive to sound. So the humans took on this form of monsters in the dark.
Yeah, because like, I the lights, yeah, that makes perfect sense. But with the monsters and that kind of stuff. And I suppose, yeah, like, if you think about it, the Doctor's clothes are shredded, but there's no wounds on his body that would match up to whatever could do that to his clothes. Like, he doesn't have scratches, he just has bumps and bruises. So yeah,
I did wonder what did they do to his coat.
Scissors?
Yeah, it's like, what are they doing? Either their nails have gotten very, very long.
Yeah, just raking him. Yeah, but I just think like I would prefer to have maybe have a bit more of an overt sign of them throughout the story to kind of make you wonder, is there something else out there, or is it just, poison in the water? The fact that the guy is clearly insane and thinks they're at war, I think he would have been a good character, but he's just introduced way too late in the game for me.
Yeah, I think, had we seen more throughout the episode or throughout the story where, say when they leave the aqueduct, we see even just their shadows moving, or, a hand coming out, or, we see, even like where they see the light bulb, if Susan puts in a light bulb and then they walk away and then we cut back and we see the light bulb's been removed again.
Yeah.
Even with something like that, I didn't really write anything down about number 1 and number 2 because they're not non-people, but like they don't really do much. The commander though, he's an evil fucker. Who the hell flies around in space with deadly nightshade just on their person?
Well, see, that's the thing. I'd be wondering that. Okay, so clearly, so there's one or two things. One, is belladonna a natural occurring plant life on the Sensphere? No one says anything to the otherwise. But is deadly nightshade, is it used in anything else that's beneficial, or is it just one of those things that, kind of like every animal in Australia, it's designed to kill you?
I don't know, but the fact that this man is clearly cultivating it, when he says, "Oh, your next round of ammunition or something is ready," he means that there's more nightshade after being cultivated. He has clearly gone mad, as you said. Whether he just went mad in the dark of the aqueduct or whether he was mad beforehand, we don't know. But do you get the sense he's also delusional in the sense that he thinks that there are more than just the 3 of them there? Because I found it quite funny. I couldn't help but laugh when he says to, I think it's number 1, and he's like, "Oh, tell the men they did very good." And number 1 says, "Thanks." I am the men. It is me.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. You kind of would, because you wonder what his instructions to the 2 guys are, because clearly they're only able to poison different water supply or different outlets to the water supply at different times. For whatever reason, because that was the doctor said that it seems to be roving between the 10 districts. And you would, if it's a tactical ploy on his part, he probably wouldn't have say well done to the men. Yeah, and as you said, it's just the guy in the corner going, thanks chief. So I think he probably does think there's 1 or 2 other guys there with them, or maybe he's deluded himself into thinking that the 2 fellas that died on the ship are actually still normal part of the crew, maybe.
Yeah, because just because the way he talks to Ian and the doctor, where he's saying "Oh, I've a great," basically saying, "I have a great bunch of lads here. They're very loyal," and you're like, you've 2 guys who you don't even call them by their name.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think he could have been an amazing villain. As it was, he's a grand last episode villain, but I would have liked to have seen more from him.
Well, and you'd be kind of wondering, as well, that all 3 of them look like they've auditioned for the Dubliners, big bushy hair and beards. I can imagine it's a scenario of if he was completely insane, he'd be like, "You got to better make sure that the haircut is regulation. What we use? The scissors we used to destroy that guy's coat." So, thanks for another interesting discussion about the character growth and the villains of the week, Trish. How about we now discuss our overall scores for the story?
Sure. So, I have owned the Sensorites on DVD for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's probably one of the first ones I got when I started collecting the Doctor Who DVDs back when we were in college. I don't recall ever watching it repeatedly.
Yeah.
It wasn't like the Aztecs that I watched over and over again. I don't know why. It's a nice, solid story. It has a few things that bothered me.
Yeah.
One in particular nearly had me putting my fist through the telly, which was that high-pitched whine in the first episode.
Yeah.
That's meant to be the Sensorites coming. How I am with high-pitched noises. That nearly killed me.
Yeah.
It went on for way too long and was way too high-pitched. I literally nearly put my hand through the screen. And like we said, the whole thing with the humans on the sense sphere,
Yeah.
that we would have liked a bit more development of them. Other than that, though, I think it was a good story overall. It flowed quite well. I was never bored.
Yeah.
I don't know why I haven't rewatched it more than I have. But again, to be honest, I don't know if I'll rewatch it again.
Yeah.
It's a nice, solid story, but there's nothing in it that draws me to it in any big way, if that makes sense.
No, it does completely, because like there's a lot of stuff there that you go, this is absolutely fantastic. How many times have you watched it? Twice. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, it's a solid science fiction story.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good Doctor Who science fiction story. Sometimes they can be a bit dodgy.
Mm-hmm.
This one was done quite well. And for me, it's a nice solid 4. Will I watch it again? Probably not. Unless I'm doing a bit of a Susan binge of her best moments. But, you know, would I recommend someone to watch it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
I'm a slight bit lower than you. I've gone with a 3.75 because for me, I think the resolution is very rushed. In that as we call them, the fifth column, they just kind of appear, and would have preferred to have seen them a bit more. Also, the city administrator, he gets his comeuppance off screen. I would have liked to have seen something, kind of maybe him being accosted or thrown in jail, or even if the guys just kind of oust him, going like j'accuse or whatever the case is. So I think the resolution does hurt it a bit for me. I agree with you in that it's a great science fiction story for Doctor Who, and it's great to see the Doctor and Susan as well getting centre stage. One thing I would like to point out, and I mentioned it in the Daleks, that I have a pet peeve for, I would say, humanoid, like Earth-based or humanoid societies that have a tendency to dress the exact same way, same haircut, same pants, the whole lot. Now, with the Sensorites, yes, they all look the same. Yes, they all wear the same grey, well, I think it's blue in the colorized photos, spacesuit. However, their job designations or their title designations, there's different sashes and different emblems. Like the first elder has 2 sashes going acrossways, second elder has 1 sash going crossways. The chief warrior, his ones are on his arms. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it, that okay, cool, there's a way to tell them all apart. They're not just, as you mentioned, a Tal 1, Tal 2, this Tal, a special Tal, that type of thing.
Yeah, I think they did that really well.
Yeah.
I did find, even from like the beginning where you see the hand coming in to take the key or the lock mechanism out of the TARDIS, I did kind of laugh that their day-to-day clothes are basically a onesie.
Yeah.
They're basically going around in a onesie and gloves. And their feet / shoes / I don't know what they're like they look like big flipper things. And looking into it, apparently they were, as you can imagine, really difficult to walk in.
Yeah.
I will say though that while the onesie was a bit off-putting, I like the way that they designated, and it's kind of weird to say, I liked the way they represented the caste system.
Yeah.
But I liked the way they had clear ways to delineate who was who, which we don't always get.
Yeah.
And I did like their face makeup.
Yeah, I remember the first time I watched it, I was a bit, because I don't know if anyone's ever, like you see those pictures of bald men with beards and people just flip it around so that their hair is on top of their head type thing.
Yeah.
And that's the very first time I watched the Sensorites, like 10 or so years ago. I'd seen that picture of Patrick Stewart with his goatee flipped around. And that's all that came into my head, because they have like chin whiskers going around, like the sideburns, chin whiskers. All I could think of was, are those masks upside down?
Yeah, I think it was good though. I think it came across quite well.
It did. Like on second time around, yeah, it looks perfect. Also, I have to disagree with you. I think that those pajama suits they were wearing, they made me feel very comfortable. I was envious. I wanted a pair. Maybe not so much with the feet aspect of it.
If you ever go to a Doctor Who con, that can be your Doctor Who cosplay.
Absolutely. I dress for comfort, not for impression.
The other thing with the face makeup, and I mentioned this to you, not on podcast, but just, me and Paddy talk outside of the podcast. I mentioned this to you a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but like I said, I haven't watched this episode a lot over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
I'd say I've maybe watched it 4 times total in those 10 years, including watching it twice for today. But when I was getting ready to go into today, I was like, oh, it'll be really interesting to compare the Sensorites to the... Is it the Telosians from The Cage?
Yes.
In Star Trek?
Yeah.
And for years, I have associated those two beings as being quite similar. They're nothing like them. I don't know why. They don't look like them, other than they have big heads.
Yeah.
Their mental powers are nowhere near the same. Their behavior isn't the same. Yet, for ages, I sort of associated those two things as being similar. They're not similar at all.
No. Oh, yeah, I get that. It's with... I think when it comes to science fiction, like our early day science fiction, there's only so much uniqueness to certain things. Like one thing that I was kind of thinking about going, as we mentioned earlier on in other episodes, how much stuff other sci-fi franchises seem to subtly adopt from Doctor Who, and putting like, you know, you've got the Sensorites, who are like a telepathic based society, and with the Telosians, who are also extremely telepathic. Yeah, you would kind of have that bit of a link, but then again, it's when you watch the stories that you see, okay, it's just the most basic of linkage. Everything else then is unique.
Yeah. I don't know why I got that in my head, because I remember saying it to you a few weeks ago, and you kind of gave me a funny look, as if to go, why do you think that?
Just drop one of those like human anatomy charts. He was like, look, first of all, their brains are different, their clothing styles are different, which I hate for the Telosians.
So, overall, solid sci-fi story. A couple of things we maybe would have liked better, but not a bad story, to say the least.
No, and again, it just be, like as I said, like even though it's a 3.75 for me, I would still recommend this story to watch for someone, like, you know, if they were interested in Susan especially, or if they wanted to see the more science aspect of a Doctor Who story. I would definitely recommend this one.
Definitely.
I don't know why I emphasized science there. It was just weird.
Next week, we will be discussing the 8th and final story of Season 1, Reign of Terror. So be sure to tune in for that.
Yes. And if you would like to hear more about upcoming episodes and join in the conversation with us, you can check us out at Time Teamp, that's TIMETEAMP, on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, or you can email us at timetravelingteamp@teamproductions.com. Until next time, guys. Bye.
Bye.